I'm here to introduce our first keynote. He doesn't need a big introduction, but I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. I first met him when he was pitching me his private equity and venture fund when he was living in the US, planning to come to India, and he started this fund. And little did I imagine that he would not only move back to India, but then become a philanthropist that all of us admire. He first started the Central Square Foundation, then played a major role in starting, Ashoka University, but also many, many other organizations. Ashish Dhawan has been such a key person and a catalyst in spawning new organizations, in increasing capacity, in opening up new avenues for philanthropy in India. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Ashish to turn on his video and join us for his opening keynote, where he's going to discuss how we can increase the philanthropic giving in India. Hello, Ashish. Welcome.
Thank you, MR. It's an honor to be invited here. I've known you for 20 plus years, and it's incredible to see the work that Indiaspora is doing, and an honor to be on this list. I have a presentation that I'll run through, but I wanted to start by saying that I'm very excited at the prospects of what's happening in India and with the diaspora. I think the philanthropy has been an essential part of India for centuries, but we're at a seminal moment where wealth has been crystallized to a great extent in the last decade or two, and we always had leaders like the Tatas who've been giving for decades. But given the number of first generation wealth creators in India and around the world, we're seeing such an upsurge in philanthropic giving in the more recent past. And I do want to point out that I think particularly Mr. Premji's commitment in India is really the equivalent to what Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller did in the US about 100 years ago, which sort of catalyzed the whole philanthropic movement in the US. And I think Mr. Premji has done the same in India. And folks like Nandan have shown us how he can be so innovative and so creative and work at such scale to make things happen. So frankly, these are two great role models we have. And so many other people like Ronnie and Anu and others who are involved in this program as well. So I'd like to request for the slides that I have to be pulled up and run you through some of my thoughts. The next slide, please. Clearly there's the opportunity for strategic giving, strategic philanthropy, and this can be a real driver for economic and social transformation in India. India is still just a $2.5 trillion economy. Our per capita income is only $2,000. But the state does spend now almost $300 billion on development expenditure. This is largely spent by state governments in India. So philanthropy will always be a drop in the bucket compared to what government spends, that $300 billion of development expenditure. And so really my belief is that the best philanthropy needs to be flexible, innovative, and yet audacious to attempt system change, to really attempt to make that 300 billion more effective, to come up with new ideas, which government can't do because it's a behemoth, to create an ecosystem in terms of partnerships and working with others, and really to take a long-term view in terms of shaping the agenda, supporting organizations and organization building. And there's a real opportunity to do that in the Indian context, given that we have so many problems that are yet to be solved, whether it's in education, health, or many other areas. The next slide, please. My own journey just started about a decade ago, and I've learned so much over this period of time. As MR mentioned, really spent most of my time with Ashoka and CSF, but in the last 3 years, I've also created a few other organizations. And now my own plan over the next 10, 15 years is to take a much more focused approach to building more institutions and foundations in key areas of economic growth, creating greater opportunity for all, and a thriving global South ecosystem. By that, I mean that one of the things I've realized is a great opportunity for us to learn from other developing emerging countries where conditions are similar to India, and for India to lead the world with its development model. Given that I believe that the Chinese state, given that it lacks a civil society sector, the way India has one, we have a real opportunity to lead the emerging world in terms of not just philanthropic giving, but also role models for development. The next slide, please. I believe it's a moment for us to look at accelerating philanthropy in India. MR has set a goal of doubling philanthropy. I think that's very achievable. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of wealth has gotten crystallized. You know, a lot of philanthropists are choosing to give later in life. I personally left my corporate career in my early 40s. And even if people don't leave their corporate career, most people will stay. I do see now, I mean, we've seen it in the context of Ashoka. We have 150 plus founders, donors. Many of them are in their 40s and 50s. They've just written meaningful check. And I believe if they're encouraged, we can see them start to give more, give sooner, and give better. And that's the real opportunity I see in the Indian context. The next slide, please. There are many initiatives in India that have helped spur giving. Anu and I have been involved with the India Philanthropy Initiative led by Mr. Premji, and it's done a great job in terms of educating philanthropists, bringing philanthropists together to share knowledge and just encourage more people to start giving. There are also organizations like Tasra, Give India, many others that have worked on spurring the philanthropic ecosystem. I'm working on a new initiative as well called AIP, along with a couple of other philanthropists, where the idea really is to further spur philanthropy and to do this in a very structured manner, much like a wealth management firm, where there are senior resources working on philanthropic advisory for HNIs in particular and UHNIs. And we build, I still believe we need lots of frameworks, case studies, and more networks to be created. So I think there's more to be done, particularly to encourage first-time givers, some of the givers in their 40s and 50s, etc. The next slide, please. I think there's great degree to be learned from people who've come ahead of us. Obviously, the Tatas have created a number of great institutions in India, from the Indian Institute of Science to TIFR, TIS, Tata Memorial Center, the NCPA, et cetera, and they're running wonderful programs to this date. I do want to point out, you know, Andrew Carnegie, who was the richest person in the world at one point in time, and then hung up his boots and really dedicated the last part of his life to philanthropy, and famously said that he who dies rich dies disgraced. And what a lot of you may not know, that he actually created about 20 institutions in his lifetime, and the Carnegie Foundation continues to do incredible work. This is just a list of few of the institutions, but there are really about 20 that he created. And I think there's a real opportunity for many philanthropists in India to not just run programs, but build a variety of different institutions that have a lasting effect in terms of economic and social transformation. There are so many institutional voids to be filled. There's so much that can be done at the early stages in terms of getting these institutions up and running. And there are more leaders and there's more talent coming to the sector to really build these high quality institutions. So much like what Carnegie did, and what I'll show you, just if you could turn to the next slide. You know, the Rockefeller Foundation also, I've been studying a little bit of the history of philanthropy, some incredible work. Many of you may not know that the Green Revolution, which actually hit India, you know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, a lot of the research that was done in Mexico, elsewhere, was actually funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Similarly, the early work in this education in the southern part of the US through the Global Education Board by the Rockefeller, and many other such programs. The Ford Foundation came later, has done some really catalytic work. So there's a lot for us to learn from these institutions and to be inspired. And I think this is a seminal moment where philanthropists should not only accelerate the giving, but also be really audacious to think, can we be inspired by the Tatas, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fords, to do something similar in the Indian context, which is to build institutions that will last and to drive catalytic programs that will get the state to perform better in terms of delivering essential development services in the Indian context. And so I'm personally very excited about doing much more myself in the next 15 years and really working alongside many others who are embarking on this journey. Thank you for inviting me. And I look forward to listening to my fellow co-panelists.